The wind was a restless wolf, prowling the edges of the sacred clearing and carrying the scent of pine and crushed frost. Above, the sovereign moon hung like a silver wound in the black velvet sky, its light so pure it bleached the color from the world, leaving only shadows and bone-white stone. 1,000 wolves, 2,000 eyes, watched from the surrounding darkness, their collective breath a low, expectant hum. I knelt on the cold heart of the claiming stone. The ceremonial linen I wore a whisper-thin barrier against the granite that drank the warmth from my bones. This was the moment my life had been forged for, the culmination of every lesson, every quiet sacrifice, every dream I had been taught to have. Tonight I was to become Luna. My heart hammered a frantic, desperate rhythm against my ribs, a trapped bird fighting its cage. They saw a picture of serene submission, a daughter of the Windcrest line ready to fulfill her destiny. They could not hear the silent scream tearing through my soul, nor feel the ice of rebellion solidifying in my veins. My wolf, a shadow I had learned to smother since birth, was silent, a hollow ache where a primal howl should have been. For I was not just Solara Windcrest, chosen bride. I was Solara the flawed, the one whose inner beast never rose to the moon's call. My submission was not just for the pack, but for my survival. But survival had begun to taste like ash. The scent of him reached me then, cutting through the ritual smoke, ozone, cold iron, and the raw, untamed power of a winter storm. He was coming, and with him, the end of everything I was. Kalen Dravaris, Alpha of the Iron Fang, moved not like a man, but like a force of nature. Silence rippled out before him. The pack's low hum ceased. The wind itself seemed to hold its breath. He was carved from the same granite as the mountains that ringed our territory, his shoulders a bulwark against the world, his face a mask of harsh plains and ancient scars. One jagged line cut from his left temple to the corner of his mouth, a permanent snarl etched into his flesh. But it was his eyes that held the true terror and power. They were not black, but the deep, starless gray of a winter sky, just before the blizzard hits, and they burned with an intensity that stripped you bare. He stopped before me, his shadow falling over me like a shroud. The sheer scale of him was overwhelming, a physical pressure that made the air thick and hard to breathe. I was supposed to feel awe, a primal pull of submission, the female wolf yearning for its mate. I felt only the cold, sharp edge of a trap closing. I saw in his eyes not a partner, not a protector, but a king who saw me as another jewel for his crown, another piece of territory to be claimed and owned. The elder matron, Lyra, her face a web of deep-set wrinkles, raised her gnarled hands. Her voice, thin and reedy, carried on the frozen air. The moon is witness, the ancestors watch. Kalen of the House Dravaris, Alpha of the Iron Fang, do you claim this woman, Solara of the House Windcrest, to be your Luna, your mate, your bond sworn until the stars fall from the sky? Kalen's gaze never left mine. His voice was a low rumble that vibrated through the stone beneath my knees, a sound that promised both shelter and destruction. I claim her. The words were a physical blow. The pack sighed as one, a wave of relief and satisfaction. My parents, standing at the edge of the circle, looked proud, their duty done. They did not see the tremor in my hands, which I clenched into fists in the folds of the linen. Solara of the House Windcrest, the elder continued, her eyes pinning me, demanding obedience. Do you accept his claim? Do you offer your neck for his mark, your heart for his keeping, your life for his pack? This was it, the precipice. Generations of Windcrest women had knelt on the stone and whispered, I accept. Their ghosts surrounded me, their dutiful voices echoing in my mind. Say the words, bare your neck, live. To refuse was not just unthinkable, it was a death sentence. A rogue female, unmarked and unclaimed by the Alpha, was less than nothing, an exile prey. I lifted my head slowly, my neck aching with the tension of 1,000 unshed tears and unspoken protests. I met Kalen's storm-gray eyes. I saw the flicker of impatience, the certainty of his victory. He expected me to tilt my head, to expose the vulnerable arch of my throat, the place where his teeth would sink in and brand me as his property forever. My gaze traveled past him to the faces in the crowd. I saw the hunger in the eyes of his warriors, the envy in the faces of the other women, the cold calculation of the council elders. I was not a person to them. I was a symbol, a vessel for the next alpha heir, a treaty made flesh. My silence, my wolflessness, had made me the perfect, docile Luna, a beautiful doll who would never challenge his authority. The rebellion that had been a spark became a raging inferno. It burned away the fear, the years of conditioning, the desperate need to please. What was a life lived in a gilded cage? What was survival if the soul was already dead? My breath came out in a white plume in the frigid air. The elder cleared her throat, a sharp, impatient sound. Solara? I rose, not gracefully, but with a sudden jolting movement that made the crowd gasp. I did not rise to my feet, but I pushed myself up from my knees to stand before him on the claiming stone, placing myself on his level. It was an act of shocking insubordination. Kalen's eyes narrowed, the storm within them gathering force. A low growl started deep in his chest, a sound like shifting tectonic plates. I bared my neck, but not in submission. I tilted my head back, exposing my throat not as an offering, but as a challenge. My chin was high, my eyes locked on his. The linen slipped from one shoulder, revealing the smooth, unmarked skin that he believed was his to claim. My voice, unused to command, was not loud, but it was clear and sharp as a shard of ice. It cut through the sacred silence of the clearing with devastating precision. I will not wear your mark. For a heartbeat there was nothing. Absolute, deafening silence. The world seemed to freeze. The moon held captive in the sky. The wind stilled in the trees. Then chaos erupted. A collective, horrified gasp swept through the pack like a physical wave. Shouts and furious growls tore the night apart. My father cried my name, a sound of pure anguish. The elder matron staggered back, her hand flying to her chest as if I had struck her. But I saw only Kalen. His face had become a mask of stone, but the blizzard in his eyes had broken free. It was a tempest of pure, undiluted fury. The air around him crackled with power, his aura pressing down on me, trying to force me to my knees. The growl in his chest was no longer a rumble. It was the roar of a predator denied its kill. I felt the primal, terrifying impulse to flee, to submit, to beg forgiveness. But I held my ground, my body trembling with the effort. He took a step forward, the granite of the stone groaning under his weight. He was going to kill me, here, in front of everyone. He was going to rip out the throat I had so defiantly offered. "You dare?" he breathed, the words a ghost of smoke and rage. Before I could answer, a shriek came from the edge of the circle. It was old Alara, the pack's lorekeeper, a crone so ancient she was said to remember the founding of the Iron Fang. Her eyes were wide with a terror that was deeper than mere shock. It was a look of horrified recognition. "The law!" she wailed, her bony finger trembling as she pointed at me. "She has invoked the ancient law, the refusal." A new silence fell, this one laced with confusion and a dawning dread. The elders exchanged frantic, panicked glances. My father's face went white as snow. Kalen froze, his hand half raised, his knuckles white. The fury in his eyes was momentarily eclipsed by disbelief. He turned his head slightly toward the crone. "What nonsense do you speak, old one? There is no law that allows this insult." "There is," she cried, her voice gaining strength. "It is the oldest law, from before the first Alpha was crowned. A law of balance. If the chosen Luna refuses the mark on the claiming stone, under the witness of the sovereign moon, she does not face exile." Her gaze snapped back to me, filled with a terrible, dawning awe. "She earns the right of challenge." A tremor went through the crowd. Challenge? A wolfless female challenging the alpha king. The idea was so insane, so utterly blasphemous, it was laughable, but no one was laughing. The weight of the crone's words, of the forgotten magic she spoke of, settled over the clearing like a death pall. Kalen slowly turned back to me. The rage was still there, a living inferno behind his eyes, but now it was joined by something else. A dark, dangerous curiosity. He looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, not as a docile bride, but as some impossible creature that had crawled out of myth and legend to stand before him. He closed the remaining distance between us in a single fluid stride. His heat enveloped me, his scent flooding my senses, primal and overwhelming. He reached out not to strike but to cup my jaw in his hand. His fingers were like iron, his callous thumb brushing against my lip, a touch that was both a caress and a threat. He forced my head up, making me meet the full terrifying force of his gaze. "A challenge?" he murmured, his voice a low, intimate growl meant only for me, though every wolf in the clearing strained to hear. "You who have no wolf! You who have never thrown a punch or tasted blood in battle! You wish to challenge me?" I trembled in his grip, but I did not look away. I had lit the pyre. Now I had to withstand the flames. "It is not a wish," I managed to say, my voice shaking but unbroken. "It is my right." A dark, humorless smile touched his lips, a terrifying sight against the scar. The pressure on my jaw increased, and I felt the deep, animalistic power coiling within him. A promise of violence held barely in check. The world narrowed to the space between us, to the storm in his eyes and the thundering of my own heart. "So be it," Kalen Dravaris whispered, his breath ghosting across my skin. "You have rejected my mark, Solara Windcrest. You have claimed the right of challenge, but it is not my freedom you will fight for." His gaze dropped to my throat, to the smooth, bare skin he had meant to own, and his eyes burned with a possessive fire that was far more terrifying than his rage. "You will challenge me for the throne itself." The words, "for the throne itself," hung in the frozen air, colder and sharper than any icicle. They were a death sentence and a coronation in one, a declaration of war spoken in a lover's whisper. Kalen's thumb stroked my jaw one last time, a gesture of ownership that sent a tremor of pure terror through me, and then he released me. The absence of his touch was as shocking as its presence, leaving my skin cold and tingling. He stepped back, his face an unreadable mask of granite, and turned to face the stunned, chaotic pack. "The claiming is over," he announced, his voice a crack of thunder that silenced every panicked whisper and furious growl. "The council will convene, immediately." He didn't look at me again. He didn't have to. His claim had been made, not with his teeth, but with his words. He had branded me not as his mate, but as his rival. Two of his personal guard, the hulking betas named Vorlog and Rorik, moved with grim purpose. They took up positions on either side of me, their presence a cage of muscle and menace. I was no longer the cherished Luna to be. I was a prisoner on my own claiming stone. Vorlog's hand clamped around my upper arm, his grip bruisingly tight, and pulled me from the dais. The thin linen of my ceremonial dress offered no protection from the cold or the hundreds of accusing eyes that burned into me. As they marched me through the throng, the wolves parted as if I carried a plague. I heard the word whispered like a curse. Challenger. I saw hatred in the eyes of women who had once envied me. I saw confusion and bloodlust in the eyes of the warriors. I saw utter despair on my father's face as he reached a hand toward me, only to have it slapped away by Rorik's gauntlet. My mother had collapsed into the arms of her sisters, her sobs lost in the cacophony. I had not just refused a mark. I had shattered my family, disgraced my lineage, and thrown the entire pack into turmoil. The weight of it was a physical thing, threatening to crush my spine. The council hall was a cavernous space carved into the heart of the mountain, the stone walls echoing with the whispers of 1,000 years of judgments. A great fire roared in a central hearth, casting long dancing shadows that writhed like angry spirits. The 13 members of the High Council were already seated around a massive, petrified oak table, their faces grim. Kaelin stood at the head of the table, not seated, but looming over it like a predator guarding its kill. I was shoved onto a simple wooden stool, placed in the center of the room, isolated and exposed. Old Alara, the lore keeper, was brought in and given a seat of honor near the fire, her ancient eyes holding a spark of something I couldn't decipher. Fear, or perhaps a terrifying excitement. Garrick, the eldest councilman and my father's sworn rival, was the first to speak, his voice dripping with venom. "This is an abomination. An affront to the moon, to our ancestors, and to our alpha. The girl is either mad or in league with dark spirits. The law she hides behind is a forgotten relic, a dangerous myth that has no place in a civilized pack. I say we cast her out. Let the wilderness have her." A chorus of angry agreements followed. "She is wolfless," snarled another. "How can a being with no wolf, no inner beast, dare to challenge the Alpha Prime? It is a mockery." My father, his face ashen, finally found his voice. "She is my daughter. She is overwrought, the pressure of the claiming. Perhaps her mind is not her own tonight. Mercy, Alpha, I beg you." I flinched at his words. He was trying to save me by painting me as a weak, hysterical female. It was the same cage I had just fought my way out of, and the shame of it burned hotter than the fire. Kaelin remained silent, his arms crossed over his massive chest, his storm-gray eyes fixed on me. He was letting the council tear me apart, letting me feel the full consequence of my defiance. He wanted to see if I would break. It was Alara who finally quieted the room. She rose slowly, leaning heavily on a staff of twisted ironwood. "The law is not a myth, Garrick," she rasped, her voice thin but carrying an undeniable authority. "It is the foundation upon which the Alpha's throne was built. It ensures that power is never absolute, that the heart of the pack has a voice, even if it speaks only once in 1,000 years. The refusal is binding. The moon was witness. The Alpha spoke the words. The challenge has been issued and accepted." Garrick slammed his fist on the table. "The challenge requires trials. What trial can this shell of a woman possibly endure? She will die in the first hour." "That is for the moon to decide, not you," Alara said, her gaze unwavering. "The ancient law dictates 3 trials. They are not tests of brute strength alone. They are the trial of spirit, the trial of heart, and the trial of blood. Each must be completed between one moon and the next. To fail any one of them is to forfeit one's life." A chill deeper than the mountain stone seeped into my bones. Trial of spirit, trial of heart, trial of blood. They sounded like a death dirge. I had to speak. If I stayed silent now, they would decide my fate without ever hearing my voice again. I pushed myself to my feet, my legs trembling so hard I thought they might give way. Every eye in the room snapped to me. "I am not mad," I said, my voice quiet but firm. I looked directly at Garrick, then at my father, and finally at Kaelin. "And I am not weak. I did what I did because the choice of who marks me, who binds my soul, must be my own. If your laws value Aluna so little that her only worth is in her silent submission, then your laws are what is flawed, not me." A shocked silence greeted my words. No one, least of all a woman, spoke to the council with such audacity. I saw a flicker of something in Kaelin's eyes, not anger, but a sharp, assessing glint. Garrick sputtered, his face purpling with rage. "Insolence, she condemns herself with her own tongue." "Enough!" Kaelin's voice cut through the air like a blade. All debate ceased. He pushed away from the table and began to pace before the fire, his movements fluid and dangerous. The flames illuminated the harsh lines of his face, the silver strands in his dark hair, the raw power that radiated from him like heat. "The crone is right," he said, his back to me. "The law is the law. My claim was refused. Her challenge was invoked. I accepted it. To go back on it now would show me to be a coward, ruled by fear, not by strength. It would be a greater weakness than her defiance. He turned, and his gaze pinned me to the floor. The pack will see its alpha face this challenge. They will see him uphold our most ancient traditions. And they will see him crush this rebellion decisively and without mercy. His words were for the council, but his eyes were a promise to me, a promise of pain. She will have her trials, he continued, his voice dropping to a low, menacing purr. She has rejected the honor of being my mate. Now she will face the consequences of aiming for my throne. He looked at Alara. Tell us of the first trial. Alara bowed her head. The first trial, she intoned, her voice taking on a formal, ritualistic cadence, is the trial of spirit. It tests the challenger's bond with the territory, their endurance, their will to survive. The challenger must travel to the silent peaks, to the summit of the widow's needle, and bring back a single, perfect bloom of the moon petal flower. They must go alone, with nothing but the clothes they wear. The flower only blooms for one night, under the light of the full moon. It withers by dawn. A wave of murmurs and horrified gasps filled the hall. The silent peaks were the most treacherous part of our territory, a range of barren, windswept mountains where the air was thin and the cold was lethal. Vicious snowcats and rogue wolves hunted there. The Widow's Needle was the highest, most inaccessible peak, a sheer spire of ice and rock that even our most seasoned warriors avoided. To attempt it without supplies, in the dead of winter, was not a trial. It was a method of execution. My blood ran cold. I could feel the hope draining out of me, replaced by a vast, empty despair. This was impossible. This was a death sentence disguised as a tradition. Kalen watched my reaction, a cruel, triumphant smile playing on his lips. When? The next full moon, Alara confirmed. In 3 weeks' time. It is decided, Kalen declared, his voice leaving no room for argument. He strode towards me until he was towering over me once more. He leaned down, his face so close I could feel the warmth of his breath, could smell the scent of iron and winter storm that was uniquely his. The rest of the room faded away. There was only the firelight, the shadows, and the terrifying intensity of the Alpha King. You wanted power, Solara Windcrest, he whispered, his voice a silken threat. You wanted a choice. Well, you have it. You can choose to face the mountain and die, or you can choose to yield to me now. Beg for my forgiveness before the entire council, and I will show you mercy. He let the word hang in the air, freighted with implications. His version of mercy would be a life of gilded humiliation, a constant reminder of my failure, a slave in all but name. What is your choice? My heart was a wild drum against my ribs. Every instinct screamed at me to yield, to accept his mercy, to live. But I saw the look in his eyes, the cold certainty, the possessive hunger. Yielding to him would be a different kind of death, a slow suffocation of the soul. The fire I had found on the claiming stone, the spark of rebellion that had saved me, flickered, but it did not die. I met his gaze, my chin held high. I will face the mountain. For a second I saw it again, not anger, but a flash of stunned disbelief, quickly followed by a dark, dangerous respect. He had expected me to crumble. He had not expected me to choose certain death over submission to him. He straightened up, his smile gone, replaced by a mask of cold fury. Then you will be confined to the great tower until the day of your trial. See to it, he commanded Vorlog and Rorik. As they hauled me to my feet, my gaze fell upon my father. He wouldn't look at me. He simply stared at the stone floor. His shoulders slumped in defeat. He had lost a daughter and gained a disgrace. The pain of that was sharper than any fear of the mountain. They dragged me from the hall, leaving the murmuring council and the silent, brooding Alpha behind. The gray tower was a solitary spire at the far edge of the settlement, reserved for traitors and the dangerously insane. As the heavy iron-bound door slammed shut behind me, plunging me into cold, moonlit darkness, the reality of my situation finally crashed down. I was alone. I was wolfless. and in 3 weeks I was going to climb a frozen mountain to my death. I sank to the stone floor, wrapped my arms around myself, and for the first time since I spoke my refusal, I allowed a single silent tear to trace a path through the grime on my cheek. I had won my freedom from the Alpha's mark, only to be sentenced to death by the mountain's peak. The great tower was a column of silence and cold. Days bled into one another, marked only by the slow crawl of a sliver of sunlight across the stone floor and its retreat into the deep, velvet dark of night. They gave me water and bread, shoved through a slot in the heavy oak door by a guard who never spoke and never met my eyes. The isolation was a living thing, a predator that stalked the edges of my sanity. I spent hours at the single barred window, my gaze fixed on the distant, jagged line of the silent peaks. The widow's needle was a shard of black glass against the sky, impossibly high, wreathed in perpetual clouds. It was my tombstone. In the suffocating quiet, the truth I had kept buried for a lifetime began to surface. My wolflessness was not a simple affliction. It was a void. Where others felt the surge of primal instinct, the hum of a second soul entwined with their own, I felt nothing, a profound and terrifying emptiness. As a child, when the other pups played at shifting, their bodies already hinting at the power to come. I could only watch, a hollow ache in my chest. My parents, in their shame, had consulted healers and mystics, who spoke in hushed tones of a curse, a broken bloodline. They taught me to feign the connection, to mimic the behaviors, to become a perfect, silent doll. To be Kaylin's Luna was to be the ultimate lie, to bind the most powerful wolf in the world to a woman who was only half a whole. My refusal on the claiming stone was not just an act of defiance for myself. It was a desperate, suicidal act of honesty. On the 7th day of my confinement, the scraping of the bar on my door was different. It was slower, more deliberate. The door creaked open not to reveal a grim-faced guard, but the stooped ancient form of Alara, the lore keeper. She carried a small tray with a steaming bowl of stew and a cup of herbal tea. The rich scent of meat and herbs was so overwhelming after a week of dry bread that my stomach clenched with hunger. She set the tray down on the floor and looked at me, her dark, raisin-like eyes taking in my disheveled state. The tangled hair, the smudges of dirt on my face, the thin ceremonial dress that was now little more than a rag. There was no pity in her gaze, only a deep, unsettling knowing. "The tower has broken stronger souls than yours, child," she rasped, her voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "I am not broken," I said, my voice hoarse from disuse. A faint smile touched her lips. "No, not yet," she gestured to the stew. "Eat. You will need your strength." I was too hungry to be proud. I sat on the floor and devoured the stew, the warmth spreading through my chilled body like a benediction. Ilara settled herself on the lone stool, her ironwood staff resting against her knees. She watched me eat, her silence as heavy as the stones around us. "Why are you here?" I finally asked, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. "The law I spoke of is more than words in a dusty scroll," she began, ignoring my question. "It is about balance. The Alpha is the sun, fierce, powerful, a source of heat and light. The Luna is the moon, a different kind of power. She is the watcher, the keeper of secrets, the anchor for his tides of rage and instinct. When one is vastly more powerful than the other, the pack becomes unbalanced. It grows brittle, it breaks." She leaned forward, her eyes boring into me. "For generations, the Dravari's alphas have grown stronger, more dominant. The Windcrest Lunas have grown more docile, more beautiful, more silent. The balance has been lost. The pack is rotting from the inside with its own unquestioning strength." "You speak of treason," I whispered, shocked. "I speak of truth," she countered. The ancient law of refusal was not created for a defiant woman to escape a pairing. It was created for the pack itself to survive. It is a failsafe, a desperate prayer to the moon to restore what has been lost. When you spoke those words, you did not just save yourself. You offered the pack a chance to heal." The weight of her words settled on me. I had thought my act was a purely personal rebellion. To think it was part of some cosmic ancient design was overwhelming. But I have no wolf. I am the very definition of imbalance. How can I restore anything? Perhaps, Alara said softly, her gaze drifting to the barred window. A wolf is not the only source of strength. The mountain will not test your claws or your fangs. The trial of spirit is a test of will. The widow's needle does not surrender to the powerful. It surrenders to the worthy. Remember that. She rose to leave, her joints cracking in the silence. At the door, she paused. He will come to you, she said, not turning around. The Alpha, he is a man who despises puzzles, and you have become the most complex puzzle of his reign. When he comes, do not show him fear. He feeds on fear. Show him the truth you showed the moon on your claiming night. The door boomed shut, and I was alone again, but the silence was different. It was no longer empty. It was filled with the echoes of her words, with the ghost of a purpose I had never known. He came 2 nights later. There was no sound, no warning. One moment I was huddled in my thin blanket, watching the moon. The next, a shadow fell across its light, and the air in the cell grew thick and heavy, charged with a primal energy that made the hairs on my arms stand up. The scent of ozone and cold iron filled the small space. Kaelin was there, standing just inside the door, a silhouette of immense power against the dim light of the corridor. He moved into the room with a predator's silent grace, the moonlight catching the silver in his hair and the jagged line of his scar. He stopped a few feet away, his presence consuming all the air, all the space, making the cell feel impossibly small. His storm-gray eyes swept over me, and I felt the force of his gaze like a physical touch, assessing, dissecting, and condemning. I had imagined you would be weeping, he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble, perhaps scratching at the door and begging my guards for a second chance. I pulled the threadbare blanket tighter around my shoulders, forcing myself to meet his gaze without flinching, remembering Alara's words. Then you imagined a woman you do not know. A flicker of something, annoyance, maybe surprise, crossed his face. I know you are a fool. I have seen the reports from the scouts. The snows in the silent peaks are early and deep this year. The snowcats are hungry. You are not walking to a trial, Solara. You are walking to your grave. Then my blood will be on the mountain, not on your hands, I countered, my heart hammering against my ribs. Won't that be a relief for the council? He took a step closer, and I had to fight the instinct to scramble back. Do you think this is a game? You have spat in the face of 1,000 years of tradition. You have made me look weak. My wolves smell it. They see a challenger, and it makes them restless. There are whispers in the ranks, fights breaking out in the barracks. Your single act of defiance is a poison spreading through my pack. A pack that fears a single wolfless woman's voice is not as strong as its alpha believes, I shot back, my own anger surprising me. He closed the remaining distance in an instant. He didn't touch me, but he loomed over me, caging me against the cold stone wall with his body. His heat washed over me, a stark contrast to the chill of the tower. I was forced to crane my neck back to look up at him, and the sheer intimidating scale of him was terrifying. I could feel the coiled power in him, the barely restrained violence simmering just beneath his skin. You have no idea what strength is, he growled, his voice low and intense. Strength is holding this pack together when 3 rival clans are testing our borders. It's hunting down the rogue beasts that prey on our young. It's making the choice to sacrifice 100 warriors to save 1,000 families. Your entire life has been spent in soft linen and warm halls, protected by the very power you now mock. His face was so close I could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, could see the way a muscle jumped in his jaw. My breath hitched. This was the man, not the myth. The Alpha, stripped of his ceremony, burning with the fury and burden of his throne. Why? He demanded, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Give me the real reason. It wasn't just a desire for freedom. I saw your face on the claiming stone. It was more than defiance. It was terror. "What were you so afraid of?" My throat closed up. I couldn't tell him. The shame of my emptiness was a secret I had carried my entire life. To speak it aloud to him, the epitome of primal power, would be the ultimate humiliation. "I was afraid of being a fraud," I whispered, the words tearing from my soul. "Of being a hollow queen for an alpha king." He stared at me, his eyes searching mine, trying to parse the meaning behind my words. The anger in his expression slowly gave way to a profound, burning curiosity. He saw the truth of my pain, even if he didn't understand its source. His hand came up, and for a terrifying second, I thought he would strike me. Instead, his fingers brushed against my cheek, a touch so unexpectedly gentle, it was like a brand of fire on my cold skin. It was not a caress. It was a gesture of examination, as if he were testing the reality of me. "A hollow queen," he murmured, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. "You are many things, Solara Windcrest. Defiant, reckless, infuriating." His eyes darkened, holding mine captive. "But you are not hollow." The moment stretched, taut and fragile. The world narrowed to the space between our bodies, the whisper of our breath, the electric contact of his skin on mine. A strange, unwanted pull stirred deep within me, a primal awareness of him that had nothing to do with the wolf I didn't possess. It was something older, something deeply human and terrifyingly real. He pulled his hand back as if burned, a look of self-disgust on his face. He stepped away from me, breaking the spell, and the cold air of the cell rushed back in. He turned his back to me, running a hand through his dark hair. "The mountain will kill you," he said, his voice flat and devoid of its earlier heat. "I know." He stood there for a long moment, a monolith of conflicted power. When he finally turned, his face was once again the unreadable mask of the Alpha. He reached into a pouch at his belt and tossed something onto the straw pallet that served as my bed. It landed with a soft, dry rustle. "A token," he said, his voice cold as iron. "From a past challenger who thought his will was stronger than the mountain's ice. He was wrong." With that, he was gone, melting back into the shadows as silently as he had appeared. The heavy bar of the door slid back into place with a final booming thud. I was left trembling, my cheek tingling where he had touched me. My heart was a frantic, wild thing in my chest. After a long moment, I crawled to the pallet. Lying there, luminescent in a stray beam of moonlight, was a single, perfectly preserved moon petal. It was brittle and ancient, its edges brown with age, yet it still held a faint, ethereal glow. It was not a token, it was a message. And as I stared at the impossible dead flower, a cold dread washed over me. It wasn't a warning about the mountain. It was a clue to a puzzle I couldn't comprehend, left by the one man who wanted me dead. The day of the trial dawned not with light, but with a deeper shade of gray. The sky was a bruised, swollen lid over the world, pregnant with snow. Vorlog and Rorik came for me, their faces grim and unreadable. They didn't bind me. There was nowhere to run. They flanked me as we walked out of the tower and into the biting wind, which whipped my thin dress around my legs and stole the breath from my lungs. The pack was gathered in the main square, a silent, grim-faced sea of wolves in their human forms. They parted for us, their eyes following me with a mixture of morbid curiosity, contempt, and for a scant few, a flicker of something that might have been pity. I saw my parents near the front, my mother's face buried in my father's shoulder. He met my gaze for a brief, agonizing second, his expression a mask of grief. I had become a ghost to them already. Kalen stood on the steps of the great hall, a living statue carved from winter rock. He wore no ceremonial furs, only simple leather breeches and a tunic, as if the cold could not touch him. He watched my approach, his gray eyes as bleak as the sky above. Beside him, Alara held a small, unadorned leather pouch. I was brought to a halt at the bottom of the steps, forced to look up at him. The power dynamic was clear. He was the sovereign. I was the condemned. "Solara of the House Windcrest," his voice boomed, carrying over the silent square. "You stand before the Iron Fang Pack to begin the first trial, the trial of spirit. Do you stand by your challenge?" He was giving me one last chance to relent. To save myself in front of everyone, the entire pack held its breath. The silence was so profound, I could hear the whisper of the wind snaking through the buildings. I thought of the cage of my old life, of his possessive touch in my cell, of the preserved dead flower he had given me. It was not a choice between life and death. It was a choice between two kinds of death. I lifted my chin, my voice ringing out with a clarity that surprised me. "I stand by my challenge." A low collective sigh rippled through the crowd. Kalen's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping along the scar. He gave a curt nod to Alara. The old crone descended the steps slowly, her staff thumping on the stone. She stopped before me and held out the leather pouch. "The law allows you this," she said, her voice for me alone. "One item from your past life to carry with you, a reminder of what you are fighting for, or what you have left behind." My past life, a life of silent lessons and suffocating expectations. What could I possibly take from that? A ribbon, a book, they were meaningless trinkets. My eyes scanned the crowd, searching for something, anything, and found my father's gaze again. This time, he didn't look away. I saw the anguish, the shame, but beneath it, buried deep, was the memory of the man who had once taught me the names of the stars and the properties of mountain herbs. Before I was a political pawn, I was his daughter. "My father's hunting knife," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Alara's eyes flickered toward my father. A moment of tense silence, then he pushed his way through the crowd. He didn't speak. He simply unbuckled the worn sheath from his belt and handed it to Alara. It was a simple, practical blade, its handle worn smooth from years of use. It was the knife he'd used to teach me how to skin a rabbit, how to find the heartwood of a pine. It was a piece of the father I had lost. Alara placed it in the pouch and handed it to me. "The trial begins now," Kalen declared. "You will walk north until you reach the foothills. You will not stop, you will not deviate. You have until the next full moon to return with the moon petal. If you are not back by sunrise on the appointed day, you will be declared dead and the challenge void." He turned and strode back into the great hall without a backward glance, the heavy doors booming shut behind him. His judgment was passed. The spectacle was over. The crowd began to disperse, melting back into their homes, their whispers following me like ghosts. I was left alone in the vast, empty square, flanked by my two guards. "Walk," Vorlog grunted, prodding my back with a gauntleted hand. And so I walked. Out of the settlement, past the last sentry post, and onto the winding path that led toward the dark, ominous line of the silent peaks. The guards escorted me for the first mile, their silence a heavy weight. When we reached a gnarled old oak that marked the edge of the official patrol routes, they stopped. "From here, you are on your own," Rorik said, his voice not unkind. "May the ancestors have mercy on your spirit." Then they turned and left me. The true silence that descended then was terrifying. It was the silence of the wilderness, vast and indifferent. The wind moaned through the skeletal branches of the trees, a lonely, mournful sound. I looked back once at the faint plume of smoke that marked the settlement, my last tie to the world I had known. Then I turned my face to the north, to the looming mountains, and put one foot in front of the other. The first days were a blur of aching muscles and gnawing hunger. The foothills were a brutal, unforgiving landscape of sharp rocks and thorny brush. I ate what I could find, bitter roots my father had taught me to identify, a handful of frozen, shriveled berries. At night, I'd find shelter in the lee of a rock outcropping, shivering in my thin dress, clutching the leather pouch that held my father's knife. It was my only comfort. I quickly learned the rhythms of survival. I learned to read the clouds, to find water, to move with a stealth I never knew I possessed. The silence of my inner wolf, once a source of shame, became a strange kind of asset. I was not driven by the primal urges and territorial instincts that could lead a shifter into reckless confrontations. I was just a creature trying to survive, small and quiet in a vast, dangerous world. One evening, huddled by a pathetic fire I had managed to start with my father's knife and a piece of flint, I heard a low growl from the darkness beyond the firelight. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. 2 points of green light resolved into the hungry eyes of a snowcat, its lithe body a pale shadow against the rocks. It was starving, emaciated from the early winter, and it saw me as an easy meal. Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. This was it. This was the ignoble end to my grand defiance, torn apart by a common predator. My hand flew to the knife at my belt. It felt small and useless against such a creature. The cat crept forward, its belly low to the ground, a predatory rumble vibrating in its chest. Then a new scent hit the air. It cut through the pine and the cold stone, ozone, iron, and a power that made the very air crackle. A shadow detached itself from the deeper shadows of the trees. It was massive, far larger than any wolf I had ever seen. A great dark beast with fur the color of a starless midnight and eyes that burned with a cold gray fire. It was Kalen, not the man, but the wolf. The Alpha Prime in his true form. He was magnificent and terrifying, a creature of myth and nightmare. He didn't look at me. His entire focus was on the snowcat. He let out a low growl, not loud, but saturated with such absolute authority, such primal dominance, that the ground itself seemed to vibrate. The snowcat, which moments before had been the apex predator, flattened itself to the ground, whimpering. It held the submissive pose for a heartbeat, then turned and vanished into the darkness. Its flight a silent, terrified retreat. Kalen's wolf form took a single step into the firelight. His burning gray eyes finally settled on me. There was no warmth in them, no hint of rescue. There was only cold, hard assessment. He was not my protector. He was my warden, my judge. He was ensuring I walked to my own execution, uninterrupted by lesser beasts. He held my gaze for a long, breathless moment, then turned and melted back into the night, as silent as he had appeared. I was left alone, my body shaking with a reaction that was part terror, part something else I couldn't name, a strange, unwilling connection. He had not saved me for my sake. He had saved me for the sake of his trial, for the integrity of his sentence. But he had saved me nonetheless. The intimacy of that violent, silent encounter was more profound than any conversation we had ever had. The encounter changed something in me. His presence, even as a distant shadow, was a constant. I began to feel him before I saw him. A prickling on my skin, a change in the wind, the scent of a distant storm. He was shadowing me, a gray ghost on the periphery of my journey, ensuring I faced the mountain ton, and the mountain alone. It was a cruel form of torment, a constant reminder of the power I had challenged, and the man who was now inextricably bound to my fate. As I climbed higher, the landscape grew more brutal. The trees thinned, giving way to barren rock and deep snow. The wind was a constant physical assault, trying to tear me from the mountainside. My dress was in tatters, my hands and feet numb, my face raw from the cold. I was running on nothing but pure, stubborn will. One afternoon, crossing a vast, snow-blinded expanse, the ground gave way beneath me. I plunged into a hidden crevasse, my fall broken by a deep drift of snow at the bottom. I was alive, but my ankle had twisted violently, sending a bolt of white-hot agony up my leg. I was trapped, a dozen feet down in a narrow fissure of rock and ice, with a useless leg and a blizzard beginning to rage above. Despair, colder and more final than the ice around me, washed over me. This was the end. Not the snowcat, not the cold, but a simple, stupid misstep. I lay in the snow, the pain in my ankle a throbbing counterpoint to the howling wind above, and I wept. Hours passed. The blizzard screamed, dumping feet of snow, sealing me in my icy tomb. The cold was a creeping numbness, a sweet, deadly siren song luring me to sleep. I was drifting, my consciousness fading, when I smelled it again. Ozone and iron, impossibly close. I forced my heavy eyelids open. A massive dark shape blocked the sky above the crevasse. It was Kalen's wolf. He looked down at me, his gray eyes glowing in the dim light. I saw no pity in them, only an intense, frustrated fury. He had not wanted to intervene again. My weakness was forcing his hand, and he hated it. He disappeared from view, and I heard scrabbling sounds. A moment later, a length of thick rope, woven from vines, snaked down into the crevasse. It was a lifeline, but it was also a chain. Accepting it was an admission of failure, an acceptance of his power over my life and death. For a long moment, I just stared at it. I could let go. I could close my eyes and let the cold take me. It would be peaceful, but then I thought of his face in my cell, the burning curiosity in his eyes. I thought of Alara's words about balance. I thought of the condescending pity in the eyes of the pack. I would not give them the satisfaction of a quiet, pathetic end. With a cry of pain and effort, I grabbed the rope. I tied it around my waist, my frozen fingers clumsy and slow. I gave it a tug and the rope went taut. Slowly, agonizingly, he began to haul me up. I scraped against the rock and ice, my injured ankle screaming with every jolt. He dragged me over the lip of the crevasse and onto the wind-swept snowfield. I collapsed, gasping for breath, my body a symphony of pain. He had shifted back to his human form, clad in dark furs, his face a mask of rage against the swirling snow. He knelt over me, his expression thunderous. "You are the most stubborn, foolhardy creature I have ever known," he snarled, his breath pluming in the frigid air. He tore a strip of cloth from his own tunic and began to bind my ankle, his movements rough but surprisingly efficient. His touch was electric, sending shocks of heat through my frozen skin. "You should have left me," I gasped, the words torn from me by a gust of wind. He didn't look up from his task, his focus entirely on my injury. His voice, when he spoke, was a low, ragged growl that was barely audible over the storm. "Your death belongs to the mountain, not to a crack in the ice." He finished the binding, pulling it brutally tight. He then looked up, his storm-gray eyes locking with mine. In their depths, beneath the anger and the frustration, I saw something else. A flicker of a terrible, unwilling bond being forged between us in the heart of the blizzard, a bond not of love or submission, but of shared fury and relentless, defiant fire. The blizzard raged for 2 days, a white-walled prison. Kalen had forced me into a shallow cave he'd found, a mere indentation in the rock that offered minimal shelter from the screaming wind and driving snow. He built a fire at the mouth of it, a defiant heart of warmth against the absolute cold. Using skills so innate he seemed to be commanding the flames rather than coaxing them. He did not speak to me. The silence in that small space was more profound and more charged than any words could have been. He sat on the far side of the fire, a brooding silhouette, his attention fixed on the storm outside. I huddled in the back, my back against the frozen rock, my injured ankle a constant throbbing ache. He had set the bone and bound it with a skill that spoke of 1,000 battles, 1,000 such wounds dressed on the field. He had hunted, returning with 2 rabbits which he skinned and cooked with brutal efficiency, tossing me a share without a word. I ate, knowing that to refuse would be a fatal sort of pride. In the flickering firelight, stripped of his alpha's regalia and the posturing of the pack, I saw the man. The lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the tension in his powerful shoulders, that never seemed to ease, even in repose. The burden of 1,000 souls, 1,000 acres of territory, 1,000 years of tradition, was etched into his very being. He was not just a king, he was a keystone, and he believed I was a crack in the foundation. He caught me watching him, his gray eyes pinning me in the dim light. The look was not hostile, but intensely analytical, as if he were still trying to solve the puzzle of me. "The storm will break by morning," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The path to the needle will be treacherous. New snow hides the crevasses. It was a statement of fact, not a warning. I will be careful, I replied, my voice hoarse. He almost smiled, a bitter, humorless twist of his scarred lip. You do not know the meaning of the word. He shifted, turning more fully toward me, the firelight casting harsh shadows across his face. I have followed you since the day you left. I have watched you learn, watched you survive. You have a resilience I did not anticipate. You sound disappointed, I said, a spark of my old defiance returning. I am intrigued, he corrected, the word seeming to cost him some effort. I thought you were a pampered daughter of a noble house, a fragile doll who would break in the first wind. You're not that, but you are still going to die up there. Then why are you here, Kaylin? I asked, using his name for the first time without a title. It felt both forbidden and strangely right. Why follow me? Why save me? If my death belongs to the mountain, why not let the mountain take it when it has the chance? His jaw clenched. He looked away, into the fire, his profile hard as carved stone. The trial must be pure, he said, the words sounding like a rote recitation. It must be your will against the mountain's peak. Nothing else. The law demands it. The law? I scoffed softly. Or is it you? Can you not bear the thought of my story ending in a simple accident? Do you need the grand finale? The challenger, broken and frozen at the foot of the widow's needle, her quest a failure. Does your victory need to be absolute, with no room for chance or fate? He looked back at me, and the storm in his eyes was more violent than the one raging outside. You think this is about my victory? He snarled, leaning forward. This is about order, about a pack that has known peace for a generation because its alpha is unquestioned. You, with your grand, selfish gesture, have threatened to burn all of that down. Your challenge is not a quest for freedom. It is an act of supreme arrogance. And yes, I will be there to see it fail. I will watch the mountain teach you a lesson in humility you refuse to learn from me. The raw fury in his voice was a physical force. But beneath it, I heard something else. A thread of desperation. He didn't just want me to fail. He needed me to. My success was an unthinkable, world-shattering concept to him. And what if it doesn't? I whispered, the thought taking shape even as I spoke it. What if I don't fail? He stared at me as if I had sprouted wings. The idea was so alien, so utterly impossible in his mind, that for a moment he was speechless. Then he let out a short, harsh laugh. Then you will have a throne you cannot defend, a pack you cannot lead, and a rival in me that will haunt your every waking moment. You will wish for the mountain's cold embrace. The finality in his tone sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the cold. He was not just my rival in a trial. He was my sworn enemy, bound by law to let me try, but bound by his very nature to ensure my ultimate destruction. The storm broke with the dawn, leaving behind a world of stunning, pristine white. The sky was a pale, aching blue, and the snow glittered as if seeded with diamonds. The beauty was a cruel lie, masking a landscape that was now more treacherous than ever. Kaylin was already awake, standing at the mouth of the cave, staring up at the peak of the Widow's Needle. It pierced the sky, a fang of black rock draped in fresh snow, looking impossibly close and impossibly far at the same time. He had fashioned a crude crutch for me from a sturdy branch. He thrust it at me without a word. I took it, my fingers brushing his. The contact was brief, but it sent a jolt through my entire body, a sudden, unwanted awareness of the heat and strength in him. He pulled his hand back quickly, his expression shuddered. The moon is full in 2 nights, he stated. You are out of time. I didn't need the reminder. I could feel the pull of it, a strange silent hum in the air. I tested my weight on the injured ankle. It protested with a sharp, searing pain, but the binding held. It would have to be enough. He started to move away, to melt back into the shadows and resume his role as my warden, but I stopped him. Kaylin. He paused, his back to me. The flower, I said, my voice quiet. The dead one you gave me in the tower. Why? He was silent for a long moment. I could see the tension in the set of his shoulders. The challenger who brought it back died 3 days later, he said, his voice flat. His spirit was strong enough to conquer the peak, but his heart was not strong enough to survive the victory. He froze to death in his own bed, his body covered in a frost no fire could melt. He left me with that chilling story, a final parting threat. I watched him go, a dark figure against the blinding snow, until he was gone. I was alone again, but the solitude felt different. It was no longer just me against the mountain. It was me against him. Our wills locked in a silent battle across the frozen wastes. His story was meant to frighten me, to break my spirit. But instead, it lit a fire in me. The challenger hadn't failed. He had succeeded and died anyway. There was a piece of the puzzle I was missing, a danger that lay beyond the peak itself. The climb was a special kind of hell. Every step was a negotiation with agony. The crutch helped, but the deep snow made progress slow and exhausting. The air grew thin, and my lungs burned with every breath. The silence was absolute, broken only by my own ragged breathing and the occasional distant crack of shifting ice. I climbed through the day and into the twilight, driven by a frantic urgency. The moon began its ascent, huge and luminous, a perfect silver disk in the indigo sky. Its light cast the landscape in stark relief, every rock and snowdrift etched in black shadow. I was high on the shoulder of the mountain now, the peak a sheer, final spire of rock above me. And there, in a sheltered crevice on a narrow ledge, I saw them, the moon petals. They were not mere flowers. They glowed with a soft internal luminescence, their petals the color of captured moonlight, their centers a dusting of what looked like silver frost. They grew in a small, perfect cluster, pulsing with a faint cold light. Their beauty so ethereal, so impossible, it stole my breath. I had made it. Against all odds, I had reached my goal. A wave of triumphant, hysterical laughter bubbled up in my throat. I crawled the last few feet onto the ledge, my body screaming in protest, and reached a trembling hand toward the nearest bloom. The petals were not soft. They felt like spun ice, cool and delicate against my fingertips. As I plucked a single, perfect flower from its stem, a strange sensation flooded me, a profound, searing cold that had nothing to do with the air temperature. It shot up my arm and into my chest, a cold that felt ancient and alive. The preserved flower Kalen had given me. The challenger who had frozen to death after his victory. The puzzle pieces slammed together in my mind with horrifying clarity. The trial wasn't just reaching the flower. The flower was the trial. It was a vessel of the mountain's own frozen spirit. To touch it, to take it, was to invite that spirit into yourself. The cold intensified, sinking deep into my bones, a creeping frost spreading through my veins. My breath began to plume in front of my face, thicker than before. A thin layer of rime started to form on the tattered sleeve of my dress. I was dying, just as Kalen had known I would. This was the true trap. He hadn't needed to watch me fail. He had sent me to a victory that was itself a death sentence. Panic and rage warred within me. I clutched the glowing flower, its cold a burning agony in my hand. I would not die here. I would not give him the satisfaction. I had to get back. I had to show him the flower, show them all, even if it was the last thing I did. I turned, my movements clumsy, my limbs growing stiff, and he was there. Kalen stood at the edge of the narrow ledge, blocking my path. He was no longer a distant shadow, but a solid, menacing presence, his face a mask of grim inevitability in the moonlight. He had watched me take the flower. He had waited for the mountain spirit to claim me. "It is done," he said, his voice quiet, almost gentle. It was the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. "Give it to me, Solara. I will take it back to the pack. I will tell them you succeeded. They will sing your name as a hero, even as you find your peace here." He was offering me an honorable death, an easy end. All I had to do was surrender, No, I rasped, my teeth chattering uncontrollably. I held the moon petal out, not in offering, but in defiance. Its light cast a ghostly glow on my face, illuminating the frost that was beginning to crystallize on my eyelashes. My death belongs to me, not to you, and not to this mountain. I tried to push past him. It was a foolish, desperate move. He caught me easily, his hands closing around my upper arms. His grip was like iron, but through it, I felt the furnace heat of his body. Against the lethal cold consuming me, his touch was an agonizing shock, a reminder of the life I was losing. "Do not be a fool to the very end," he gurgled, his face inches from mine. "There is no escaping it. No one ever has." "I am not no one," I cried, my voice cracking. I struggled against him, a futile battle. I was weakening, the cold making my movements sluggish, my thoughts slow. His eyes, burning with a complex storm of fury, pity, and something I could not name, stared down into mine. He saw the life draining from me, saw the frost creeping across my skin, and in that moment something in his expression shifted. The grim certainty faltered, replaced by a raw, violent conflict. He had wanted me to fail, but not like this. Not as a victim of some ancient icy magic. He had wanted to break my will, not watch my life be stolen by a flower. With a curse that was torn from the very depths of his soul, he hauled me against him, one arm wrapped around my waist like a steel band, lifting me off my feet. The other hand came up, not to strike, not to restrain, but to cover the hand in which I still clutched the moon petal. "Give me the cold," he snarled, his voice a guttural command. And then he did something that shattered my world. He lowered his head, and his mouth crashed down on mine. It was not a kiss of passion or love. It was a kiss of brutal, desperate force, a primal act of transference. He wasn't trying to kiss me. He was trying to inhale the very frost from my soul, to draw the mountain's lethal spirit out of me and into himself. His kiss was a cataclysm. It was the clash of winter and fire, a desperate battle waged on the precipice of the world. His lips were hard, demanding, and through them I felt not warmth, but an impossible, consuming heat that seemed to radiate from the core of his being. It was the raw, untamed power of the Alpha Prime, a living furnace of instinct and will, the mountain's chill that had invaded my veins. That creeping, lethal frost recoiled from his touch as if from a brand. His hand tightened over mine, crushing my fingers against the icy petals of the moon petal. I felt a violent psychic jolt as the connection between me and the flower was severed. The cold didn't just recede, it was ripped from me, drawn out through my lips, through our clasped hands, and into him. I felt a tremor run through his massive frame, a deep, shuddering intake of breath as he absorbed the mountain's spirit into himself. A thin sheen of frost immediately appeared on his dark hair, silvering it in the moonlight. The skin of his hand, where it covered mine, grew deathly pale. He was taking the curse, willingly. He was trading his fire for my ice, pulling my death into his own body. The sheer insane arrogance and power of the act was staggering. He wasn't just defying the mountain. He was dominating it, consuming its essence as if he had the right. He broke the kiss with a ragged gasp, stumbling back a step. His breathing was harsh, labored. The blizzard in his eyes had become a maelstrom of pain and fury. The frost on his hair thickened, and a rime of ice traced the jagged line of his scar. He looked at me, and in his gaze, I saw the full, terrible cost of what he had done. He had saved me, but he had poisoned himself. Why? The word was a shattered whisper from my own lips. My body was trembling, not from cold, but from shock and the wild, chaotic energy that had just coursed between us. "Because your challenge is to me," he snarled, his voice raspy, his words punctuated by full visible plumes of frozen air. "You will not be claimed by a mountain. You will not be stolen by some forgotten magic. If you are to be broken, Solara, you will be broken by my hand, and my hand alone." His possessiveness was a terrifying, all-encompassing force, more absolute than any mark, He saw me not as a person to be saved, but as a conquest to be preserved for his own victory. The thought should have chilled me, but all I could feel was the ghost of his heat, the echo of his life force pouring into me. He grabbed the moon petal from my limp fingers. In his grasp, the flower's ethereal glow seemed to dim, its cold leached away. He shoved it into a pouch at his belt. The trial is not over. You have the flower. Now you must return with it. He turned from me and began the treacherous descent, his movements stiffer now, less fluid. The mountain's chill was already working on him, slowing the predator, dulling the fire. I watched him go, my mind reeling. The world had tilted on its axis. The clear lines of enemy and challenger had blurred into something raw, complicated, and dangerously intimate. I followed him, my own aches and injuries momentarily forgotten, my focus entirely on the dark, brooding figure who now carried my death sentence inside him. The journey down was a silent, grim ordeal. We moved through the pre-dawn gloom, two ghosts haunting the slopes of the Widow's Needle. The cold that had left me now radiated from him. He moved with a rigid control that I recognized as a battle against encroaching numbness. He refused my help, shrugging off my attempts to steady him with a growl of pure, frustrated pride. He was the alpha. He would not show weakness, especially not to me. We reached the foothills as the sun's first pale rays touched the horizon. The settlement was a distant smudge of smoke. We had made it, but we were far from safe. Kalen stumbled, catching himself against a tree, his breath coming in ragged, shallow pants. The frost now clung to his eyelashes, his lips were tinged with blue. "You must go on alone," he rasped, not looking at me. "You must be seen to arrive by yourself. The trial must be pure." "You are dying," I said, stating the obvious, horrifying truth. "My fate is no longer your concern," he bit out, pushing himself away from the tree. "Go, take the flower, present it to the council. That is the only thing that matters now." He was a paradox of honor and cruelty. He had saved my life only to command me to leave him to die. All for the sake of appearances, for the integrity of the law that we were both now trapped by. But I couldn't do it. To leave him here would be a betrayal of the impossible thing he had done on that ledge. It would make his sacrifice a meaningless footnote in my story. "No," I said. He turned to me, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. "What did you say?" "I said no," I repeated, my voice stronger. I stepped toward him, into his aura of cold, and met his furious gaze without flinching. "You said this was a battle between you and me. If you die here, I don't win. The mountain wins, and I will not grant it that victory." For a heartbeat, he seemed too stunned to speak. He had expected me to seize my chance, to run to the finish line and claim my success. My refusal to leave him, my tying of my fate to his, was a move he hadn't anticipated. "You are a fool," he finally breathed, a grudging, almost imperceptible note of respect in his tone. "I am your challenger," I corrected him. "My victory must mean something. Let me help you." He wavered, his pride warring with the lethal cold seeping into his bones. The shivers that racked his body were becoming more violent, his movements more sluggish. He was losing. With a final disgusted sigh that was a surrender, he nodded. Getting him back to the settlement was the hardest thing I have ever done. He was a dead weight, his immense strength failing. I put his arm over my shoulders, my small frame straining to support his. We were a pathetic, stumbling sight. The indomitable Alpha King leaning on the wolfless challenger he had sworn to destroy. Every step was an agony for him, and an exhaustion for me, but we moved. Together. The first sentry who saw us froze in pure, unadulterated shock. His jaw dropped, and he could only stare at the impossible scene. Then he bellowed, a cry of alarm that brought wolves running from the walls. Pandemonium erupted. To see me returning was a shock. To see me returning with a dying, frost-covered Alpha leaning on me shattered their reality. Vorlog and Rorik were the first to reach us, their faces masks of horror. "Alpha," Vorlog cried, trying to shove me away and take Kalen's weight. "No," Kalen's voice was a weak rasp, but it held the unyielding command of an Alpha. "She Stays. His gray eyes, glazed with pain, found mine. He was reinforcing our strange battlefield pact. My fate was tied to his. The pack had to see it. They carried him to the great hall, laying him on a platform of furs before the hearth, which the elders frantically stoked into a roaring inferno. But the heat of the fire seemed to have no effect. The frost on his skin did not melt. His shivers grew more violent, his breathing more shallow. He was encased in a cold that came from within. I stood by the entrance, forgotten in the chaos, still clutching my father's knife and the crude crutch. Alara pushed her way through the frantic healers and council members. She knelt beside Kaelin, her ancient hands hovering over his chest. She closed her eyes, her face a mask of concentration. When she opened them, they were filled with a grave, terrible understanding. "It is the mountain spirit," she announced, her voice cutting through the noise. "He has taken it into himself. No fire can warm him. No healer can draw it out. It has anchored itself to his soul." A wave of despair washed over the gathered pack. Their alpha, their immortal force of nature, was dying before their eyes, and they were powerless to stop it. Garrick, the ambitious councilman, was already looking around, his eyes calculating, sensing a power vacuum. My gaze fell on the pouch at Kaelin's belt, the moon petal, the vessel of the curse. I pushed my way through the crowd, ignoring their angry shouts and shoves. I knelt on the other side of Kaelin, opposite Alara. His eyes were closed now, his face pale as marble. "The flower," I said to Alara, my voice urgent. "It's the source." "The source and the anchor," she agreed, her eyes sharp and focused on me. To destroy the flower would be to unmoor the spirit, but it would lash out, consuming him completely in its death throes. "Then it needs a new anchor," I reasoned, my mind racing. "Another vessel to move into." Alara stared at me, her eyes widening as she understood my meaning. "Child, no, you barely survived it the first time. It has tasted you. It will consume you in a heartbeat." "He took it from me," I said, my voice low but fierce. My gaze was locked on Kaelin's still face. I saw the ledge, felt the ghost of his kiss, the brutal, selfless act that had bound us together. I will not let him have taken it for nothing. Before anyone could stop me, I reached into the pouch and pulled out the moon petal. It pulsed with a malevolent, cold light, feeding on the life force it was stealing from Kaelin. I ignored Alara's cry of protest, ignored the gasps of the council. I looked at Kaelin, at the man who had been my jailer, my tormentor, my judge, and my impossible savior. "This debt is mine to pay," I whispered to his unconscious form. Then I pressed the frozen petals of the moon petal to the one place on my body that still held the phantom heat of his touch. I pressed it to my lips. The cold slammed into me with the force of a physical blow, 1,000 times more powerful than before. It wasn't a creeping frost now. It was an avalanche. It roared into me, a ravenous, ancient entity, eager to reclaim its prize. My vision went white with cold, and a scream was ripped from my throat, a sound of pure, untempered agony. I felt my own life force being devoured, my spirit extinguished by the absolute zero of the mountain's soul. But as the darkness claimed me, as the last vestiges of my consciousness faded, I felt something else. Deep within the void where my wolf should have been, a spark ignited. A flicker of impossible heat, born from the echo of the Alpha's fire he had poured into me. It was not a wolf's soul. It was my own, reforged in defiance and sacrifice. And as the mountain spirit rushed in to consume me, it met a fire it did not expect. The two forces collided within me, and the great hall was blasted with a wave of power that threw wolves from their feet and extinguished the great hearth in a hiss of steam. I knew no more. I awoke to silence, not the oppressive silence of the gray tower or the vast, indifferent silence of the mountains Satin-Pa, but a deep, peaceful stillness that felt like the world holding its breath after a storm. I was in a bed, swathed in thick, warm furs, in a room I didn't recognize. A low fire crackled in a stone hearth, and the air smelled of wood smoke and dried lavender, sunlight, soft and golden, streamed through a large, unshuttered window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. I sat up slowly, my body ached with a profound, bone-deep weariness, but the lethal chill was gone. The agony was gone. I felt whole, more whole than I had ever felt in my life. I looked at my hands, flexing my fingers. They were my hands, but they felt different, imbued with a quiet energy that hummed just beneath the skin. The void inside me, the hollow space where my wolf had never been, was no longer empty. It was filled with a calm, steady light, a warmth that was entirely my own. The alpha's fire had not created a wolf within me, but it had ignited my own dormant spirit. And in the crucible of the mountain's cold, that spirit had been forged into something new. The door opened softly, and Alara entered, carrying a tray with a bowl of broth. She looked at me, and the usual knowing severity in her eyes was replaced by a look of deep, undisguised awe. "You have slept for 3 days," she said, her voice gentle. She set the tray on a small table beside the bed. "The pack has been waiting." "Kaelin." The name was a knot of anxiety in my throat. "He lives," she said, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. "The moment you took the spirit back into yourself, the frost receded from him. He awoke within the hour." She paused, her gaze intense. "When the wave of energy threw us all back, the moon petal turned to dust in your hand. The mountain spirit, when it met the alpha's fire inside of you, was not destroyed. It was balanced, calmed. It has found a home in you, not as a parasite, but as a partner. The ice and the fire have found their equilibrium. In you." I tried to process her words. The ancient malevolent spirit was now a part of me, tamed by a spark of my enemy's soul. I was no longer an empty vessel. I was a union of impossible opposites. "Where am I?" I asked, looking around the room. It was rustic but comfortable, the furnishings well made and sturdy. It was not a healer's room, nor was it a cell. "The Alpha's personal chambers," Alara said simply, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. "He has permitted no one else to see you." My heart hammered against my ribs. I was in his space, sleeping in his bed. The scent of ozone and winter storm, his scent, was woven into the very fabric of the furs around me. "The trials," I began, my voice faltering. "The first trial is complete," Alara confirmed. "You brought back the moon petal. You presented it, in a manner of speaking." Her eyes twinkled with a dry humor. "You survived its curse. According to the ancient law, you have succeeded. The pack knows it. They saw what you did. They felt the power you unleashed." She helped me dress in a simple tunic and leggings of soft wool that had been left for me. My own tattered dress was gone. As I stood, I felt a new sense of balance, a grounded strength I'd never known. The world seemed sharper, the colors more vivid, the sounds clearer. "He is waiting for you," Alara said, gesturing to a door on the far side of the room. "On the high balcony." My stomach fluttered with a nervous energy that was equal parts fear and anticipation. I had faced down death, a mountain, and an ancient curse. Why did the thought of facing him alone feel like the most terrifying trial of all? I walked through the door and onto a wide, windswept balcony carved from the mountainside. It overlooked the entire valley, the settlement a miniature toy town below, the vast expanse of the Iron Fang territory stretching to the horizon, and he was there. Kaelin stood at the stone parapet, his back to me. He was dressed simply, as he had been in the mountains, but he stood with the unshakable authority of a king. The sunlight caught the silver in his hair, and I knew that the frost had left a permanent mark, a reminder of the death he had courted for my sake. He must have heard me, but he didn't turn. "The council is in an uproar," he said, his voice a low, calm rumble that vibrated in the stone beneath my feet. "They do not know what to make of you. The woman who returned from the dead, who healed the Alpha, who wielded a power no one has seen in 1,000 years. Garrick is terrified. My father-in-law-to-be is trying to claim credit for your strength. They are all fools. I walked to stand beside him at the railing, a few feet of space between us. The sheer drop was dizzying, but I felt no fear. I looked at his profile, the harsh line of his jaw, the straight nose, the scar that now seemed less like a mark of violence and more like a part of his landscape. The storm in his eyes was gone. In its place was a deep, clear gray, like the calm heart of a winter morning. "And what do you make of me, Kaylin?" I asked quietly. He finally turned to look at me. His gaze was intense, searching, and stripped of all its former hostility. He saw the change in me, the new light in my eyes, the quiet confidence in my stance. "I make you my equal," he said, and the words, so simple and yet so profound, struck me with the force of a physical blow. On the claiming stone, I saw a symbol. In the tower, I saw a puzzle. On the mountain, I saw a warrior. He closed the distance between us, his movement slow, deliberate, giving me every chance to retreat. I held my ground. He stopped before me, his presence no longer overwhelming, but a powerful, steadying force. "You have completed the first trial," he continued, his voice softer now, a low murmur meant only for me. "The law dictates that the second and third must follow. The trial of heart, the trial of blood." My stomach tightened. I had almost forgotten. This was not over. We were still bound by the challenge. "But the law is ancient," he went on, his eyes holding mine, "and it allows for interpretation. It seeks to restore balance, and I believe balance has been restored." He reached out, not with the possessive grip of an alpha, but with a startling gentleness. His fingers brushed my cheek, tracing the same line his thumb had in my cell. This time, the touch did not feel like a threat. It felt like a question, a reverence. "The challenge can be ended, Solara," he whispered. "By mutual consent, the challenger can withdraw her claim, or the alpha can yield." My breath caught in my throat. Him? Yield? The concept was as unthinkable as my own victory had once been to him. "I will not yield my throne," he said, a ghost of his old arrogant smile touching his lips. But the challenge was never just for the throne. It was for the right to choose, the right to say no. His expression grew serious again, his gaze burning into me. "I am giving you the choice you were denied on the claiming stone, freely, with all the pack as our witness." He took my hand, his large, calloused fingers enveloping mine. It was not a gesture of ownership. It was a partnership. "Withdraw your challenge," he murmured, his voice a low hypnotic vibration. "End this, and stand beside me, not as a Luna chosen for you, but as a queen who has chosen her own path. Not as my possession, but as my partner. Rule with me, Solara. Be the fire to my ice. Be the heart that balances the fang. Choose me." The world narrowed to the space between us, to the warmth of his hand, the sincerity in his storm-gray eyes, the impossible choice he was laying at my feet. He was offering me everything: power, respect, a shared throne, and himself. Not the arrogant king, but the man who had faced death on a mountaintop to preserve my right to challenge him. I thought of my old life, the silent, gilded cage. I thought of the terror on the claiming stone, the defiance that had set me on this path. I had fought for the right to say no, but he was now giving me the power to say yes. And looking at the man before me, the alpha who had seen my true spirit and chosen to name it his equal, the man whose fire now echoed in my soul, I knew my answer. I had started this journey to win my freedom from him. But somewhere on that frozen mountain, in that crucible of ice and fire, my freedom had become inextricably bound to his. "I will not withdraw my challenge," I said, my voice clear and steady. A flicker of pain, of raw disappointment crossed his face. But before he could speak, I continued, a smile finally touching my own lips. "Because a queen does not withdraw, I said, squeezing his hand. She accepts the surrender of her king. His eyes widened in stunned comprehension, and then he threw his head back and laughed. It was not the harsh, humorless sound I had heard before, but a deep, genuine roar of pure, unadulterated joy that echoed across the valley. It was the sound of a winter storm breaking, of a foundation settling, of a balance finally, perfectly, found. He pulled me against him, his arms wrapping around me in an embrace that was both a surrender and a claiming, and I knew I was finally home.